kind where the darkness seems to swallow the road, and the rain forms dense curtains that make it hard to see just a few meters ahead. Gabriel, a young man returning from a visit to friends in a nearby town, was driving alone on an isolated rural road. The trees along the sides of the road seemed to form a sinister tunnel, and the only sounds he heard were the incessant drumming of the rain on the car roof and the monotonous sound of the windshield wipers moving back and forth. As he drove, focused on the dark road, Gabriel noticed a figure in the distance. As he got closer, his headlights illuminated a young girl, soaked and trembling by the side of the road. She was wearing a white dress that was now almost transparent from the rain, clinging to her frail body. Her long black hair was plastered to her pale face, and her large eyes, full of anguish, stared blankly at the road. Feeling compelled to help her, Gabriel pulled the car over next to the girl and rolled down the window. "Are you okay? Do you need a ride?" he asked, his voice sounding louder than he intended, trying to be heard over the noise of the rain. The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and sadness, but she didn't say a word. She just nodded and opened the car door, silently getting in. Gabriel felt a shiver run down his spine as he noticed how cold the girl was. She was trembling uncontrollably, and he tried to adjust the car's heater to provide some comfort. "Where do you live?" he asked, trying to sound as calm as possible. The girl raised her trembling hand and pointed in a direction down the road, but said nothing. Gabriel realized that she was visibly disturbed and, without pressing further, he drove in the direction she indicated. During the drive, he tried to make conversation, but the girl remained silent, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, as if she were reliving something terrible in her mind. After a few minutes, the road became even narrower and more winding, and Gabriel began to see a house in the distance, barely lit by a dim light coming from the porch. The house looked old, almost as if it were abandoned, with peeling paint and dark windows. Gabriel stopped the car in front of the house and turned off the engine. He turned to the girl and said, "Wait here. I'll get an umbrella from the trunk to walk you to the door." He got out of the car and ran to the trunk, grabbing an umbrella. When he returned to the passenger door, his heart nearly stopped. The girl had disappeared. The seat where she had been sitting was still wet, and some water droplets were dripping from the fabric, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Confused and feeling an inexplicable chill down his spine, Gabriel looked around, calling for her, but only darkness and the sound of rain answered. Desperate to understand what had happened, he ran to the door of the house and knocked vigorously. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, the door was opened by an elderly couple. The man, with a tired expression, and the woman, with red, swollen eyes, looked at Gabriel with a mix of curiosity and sadness. "I'm sorry to bother you," Gabriel began, hesitant. "I found a girl on the road. She was all wet and trembling, so I offered her a ride and brought her here, but she disappeared when we arrived." The couple exchanged glances, and the woman began to cry silently. The man, in a low, trembling voice, replied, "You're not the first. Our daughter, Clara, drowned in the river just over there many years ago. Since then, on rainy nights, some drivers see her on the road. She always asks to be brought home, but she never manages to come inside." Gabriel felt the blood freeze in his veins. He looked at the house and then back at the couple, feeling a deep sadness mixed with terror. Not knowing what to say, he simply nodded, apologized, and returned to the car. On the way back home, the image of the girl and the story told by the couple didn't leave his mind. Every time the car's headlights cut through the darkness of the road, he expected, with a tight heart, to see that figure again by the side of the road. And although he never saw her again, the memory of that night stayed with him forever, leaving Gabriel with the certainty that sometimes the dead cannot rest. Emily sighed with relief as she saw the sign indicating only 50 kilometers left to her town. She was exhausted after a long day of work and a meeting that ran late into the night. The road was deserted, surrounded by a dense forest that seemed to swallow the light from her car's headlights. Suddenly, Emily spotted a figure by the roadside. It was a man waving frantically. Her instinct told her not to stop, but something in the man's desperation made her slow down. "Please, help me!" the man shouted as Emily lowered her window. My car broke down and I have no cell phone signal here. Emily hesitated for a moment but decided to help. Get in, she said, unlocking the doors. The man quickly got in. Thank you, you're an angel, he said, breathless. My name is Tom. Emily, she replied, resuming driving. Where are you headed, Tom? To the next town, Tom answered, his voice still shaky. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. As she drove, Emily noticed that Tom seemed nervous. He constantly looked back as if expecting something to be following them. Is everything okay? Emily asked, starting to feel uncomfortable. Yes, Tom replied quickly. It's just that, did you notice anything strange on the road? Emily frowned. No, why? Tom hesitated before answering. Before my car broke down, I think I saw something that shouldn't have been there. A chill ran down Emily's spine. What do you mean? It was a figure, Tom whispered. Too big to be human. It was standing in the middle of the road, and when I got closer, it vanished. Emily felt her heart race. She began to question her decision to give this stranger a ride. Suddenly, Tom's eyes widened in terror. Oh my God, he gasped. It's here! Before Emily could react, Tom shouted, Watch out! It's behind us! Emily instinctively looked in the rearview mirror and her blood ran cold. A monstrous figure, with glowing eyes and sharp teeth, occupied the entire back seat. Screaming in terror, Emily slammed on the brakes with all her might. The car skidded on the wet road, spinning out of control before coming to a stop on the shoulder. Emily didn't think twice. She unlocked the doors and ran into the darkness of the forest, her screams echoing in the night. She ran until her legs couldn't take it anymore, collapsing exhausted on the forest floor. Hours later, when the police finally found her, Emily was in a state of shock, incoherently repeating about the monster in the back seat. The police investigated Emily's abandoned car, but found no sign of Tom or the creature. However, something left them puzzled. There were marks of enormous hands on the outside of the vehicle, as if something inhuman had grabbed the car. In the days that followed, the police searched for Tom, but no man matching his description was found. Nor were there any records of a broken-down car on the road that night. Emily never drove at night again, and whenever she heard stories about the creature of the lonely road, she trembled, remembering those glowing eyes in the rearview mirror and the giant handprints on her car. The mystery of what really happened that night remains unsolved to this day. Was Tom real, or was he part of something more sinister, something that inhabits the shadows of deserted roads, waiting for unsuspecting travelers? I'll never forget that night. The biting cold, the oppressive darkness, the deserted road. My name is Mike, and this is the story of the night that changed my life forever. I was driving alone, heading home after a long day of work. The full moon was my only companion, casting strange shadows on the road ahead. The dense trees on both sides seemed to close in on me, as if they wanted to swallow me whole. That's when I saw her. A solitary figure sitting on the curb. My headlights illuminated a white dress and dark hair covering her face. Something about that scene made me slow down. Hey, are you okay? I shouted through the window. No response. Just a slow movement of her head and an arm pointing forward. Against my better judgment, I stopped the car. Want a ride? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't speak, just nodded and got in the car. The air inside suddenly turned ice cold. I tried to make conversation as I drove, but she remained silent. That's when I noticed. Her clothes were soaked, and there were stains, red, wet stains on the white dress. I froze, almost causing an accident when a deer appeared in front of me, but I managed to swerve at the last second. What was once compassion turned into pure fear. Who was this woman? What had happened to her? Suddenly, blue and red lights flashed behind me. I'd never been so happy to see the police. I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands shaking on the wheel. The officer approached and asked for my documents. Then, he looked at the passenger seat and asked, "Who's she?" I turned to introduce her, and she didn't say a word. The officer asked for her documents, and that woman didn't even look at the officer's face. The officers talked among themselves, seemingly recognizing the young woman. They asked me to open her door, and without saying anything, they handcuffed her and took her to the police car. The officer looked at me suspiciously. I told him the whole story, hoping not to sound crazy. To my surprise, his face turned serious. You know, it's not the first time I've heard something like this on this road, he said. Years ago, a bride named Sarah died here on her way to her wedding. Since then, there have been reports of a woman in white asking for rides. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but the officer wasn't finished. The strangest thing is that last night, not far from here, a young woman fled after a violent fight with her fiancé. She injured him severely, and he died in the hospital. We were looking for her, and we believe we found her. I was paralyzed. The woman I had picked up was a criminal? The officer returned to his vehicle to verify my information, leaving me alone with my tormented thoughts. I got very nervous. After all, I had given a ride to a woman who had seriously injured a man just hours ago, and he had died, and I could be accused of being an accomplice to that woman. I looked at the empty seat beside me, feeling a mix of fear and confusion. I never knew the truth about what happened that night. That encounter taught me a valuable lesson. Appearances can be deceiving, and not everything is what it seems at first glance. Since then, I've never given rides to strangers again, and whenever I pass by that road at night, I can't help but look at the curb, half expecting, half fearing to see that solitary figure once more.